So we're in U.S. history, in your U.S. history book, and we're now in chapter 2, and we're in section 2. We kind of went over the first part of England coming into the race to America, to the New World. But now we're going to focus kind of back a little bit on the Virginia settlers. The Virginia settlers were early attempts of settlement too, from England, right? And we're going to be talking about one of the first settlements, Jamestown, in Virginia, and how Jamestown and Virginia became a royal colony. So here's some pictures of, as you see here, of Jamestown, and see where it is on the map there. You see where Jamestown is in Virginia, where Virginia is now. Well, this whole area was called Virginia. It wasn't the state of Virginia yet. So we're going to talk about these. We're talking about England, and so we're going to start with Sir Humphrey Gilbert and Sir Walter Raleigh, and they were in the 1539 to 1583 and 1552 to 1618. They were half brothers, and they both were into putting together fleets of ships to go to America. They really look like brothers. See those pictures there? You see this side here is Gilbert, and that's Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh is known more, and we'll find out why in just a little bit. But they put together these fleets of ships from England to come and colonize, right? Well, bad weather drove them back. And so 5 years later, Gilbert tried again, to bring a colony. And he reached New England, and he put a claim for New England for Queen Elizabeth, right? We're talking about Queen Elizabeth now, good Queen Bess, right? But the weather forced them to return to England, and they were caught in this storm and all drowned, including Gilbert. So they all drowned. So now his half-brother, Raleigh, Sir Walter Raleigh, was going to take over. Right here's his name. See right there. So, okay. Sir Raleigh, 1584. There's a colony was called Roanoke. So Roanoke is very spooky because it was a lost colony that they don't know where that happened to the people at all. Even today, they have all these different stipulations on what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke, called a ghost colony, ghost city, right? Well, why do they call it that? Let's find out what happened. Well, there was this expedition of Sir Walter Raleigh. Now, he was not on the expedition. They explored Roanoke off the coast of North Carolina, right? That area. And they named the territory Virginia for Queen Elizabeth. She was considered the Virgin Queen because she did not have a husband, right? She was always single. So they called it Virginia. Virginia after the Virgin Queen. And then in 1585, Raleigh sponsored another expedition with a short visit to Roanoke, right? He sponsored it. He sent in 1587 John White. That's what you need to know, John White. John White, he lived 1540 to 1593, brought 100 settlers to this colony in Chesapeake Bay, and they settled at Roanoke, right? So they had this settlement, going to be this one of the first settlements in America, English settlements in America. So in fact, White's wife had a daughter named Virginia. They called her Virginia Dare after what? The colony of Virginia. Her name was Virginia Dare. And she was the first child born, a white child born in America. So that might be a test question. Who was the first, what was the name of the first child born in America from England? Virginia Dare, right? And she was born in 1587 in the Roanoke colony, and it was flourishing. After 1 month, John White sailed back to England to get some supplies. He just left them for 1 month, and he sailed back to go. He was going to England to get supplies. But what was happening in England? England suddenly was at war with Spain. Remember the Spanish Armada and all that in 1588? Spain was attacking England, so he could not return in the midst of an English war or get supplies. So he had to wait till 1590 which was over 3 years later, so he returned to Roanoke then. And guess what? The entire colony had totally vanished. They had no idea what happened. And there was just one mysteriously weird thing, was this word was carved on a fence post. Croatian, or Croatian. Croatian? I always say Croatian because I think of the word Croatian, but that was the mystery. And there was an island. So they thought they must have gone to this island with that name. But as they went and explored that island, they found no one. And to this day, we really don't know what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke, the ghost colony of John White and Raleigh. Of their sponsored this expedition, and the people, 100 people, plus, more. You could imagine they were already settled with the Indians and such, and they're gone. Some people say the Indians kidnapped them. Might have been. So Roanoke would have been the first English colony, but no, Jamestown. We know of Jamestown in the Virginia Territory. And they founded a colony, but founding a colony required a great deal of money. So they had a joint stock company. These businessmen got together, and they were the forerunner of a corporation with several more businessmen. They called this the Virginia Charter. In 1606, King James granted this charter on how the government should go with this company. And there were two major companies coming to America. One was the London Company, and they would settle in South Virginia. And then they had the Plymouth Company that would settle in North Virginia, right? So you had these two different companies that were sponsoring people to come. People needed money. They need money to be able to pay back these companies. And so here we have a picture of the Virginia and London Charter, their charters. And Jamestown would be the first colony of this in 1607. These are two different companies here. So the founding of Jamestown. Well, the London Company started. We're talking about the London Company, okay? Not the Plymouth Company, but the London Company. When I think of Plymouth, you think of north. Think of London Company, you think of south. Well, the London Company came with 100 men and 100 boys mixture. And they came, they were to share their profit. They were supposed to work there for 7 years. And if they had profit in what they did, whether they farmed or whatever they did, they would be able to pay back for 7 years, they'd be able to pay all that they could, pay back their wages for what it cost for them to come. And then in 1607, this was the year, a fleet of ships sailed to Chesapeake Bay up the James River. They named it after King James. King James was the King of England then. And Jamestown was the first permanent settlement in 1607 from England. Now, we also know it wasn't the first permanent settlement in America because the Spanish had already settled, like in Florida and Augustine and stuff. But now we have Jamestown, that first English settlement, happening in 1607. You see a picture of Jamestown, but Jamestown was pretty much of a disaster. As you can see what's going to happen, the disasters here of Jamestown. But here's how they formed Jamestown. And it was men, mainly men, no women at this time. Hard times in Jamestown. Well, Jamestown seemed easy to protect and defend from the natives. They thought this is a good place to settle. But the problems. They had low-lying land, and they had mosquitoes. If you go to Jamestown, you'll find mosquitoes. And these mosquitoes carried malaria. And so a lot of the men got sick with malaria. So that was a big deal. And then the river was contaminated. They couldn't just drink out of the river. The river was contaminated. So they had a problem there, of course. And then most of the colonists were too lazy or too proud to work. They basically wanted somebody else to work. Isn't that our sin nature? And in the first winter, 1/2 of the settlers of Jamestown died. 1/2. That's a lot. 1 out of 2 people in Jamestown died. The biggest problem in Jamestown was they had a common store. They figured this out. In the charter, it said you have a common store, so everyone would work and put all of what they would raise food or whatever they did, they'd put into the common store. They each man put to work their share and received according to their needs. So the common share was that if somebody needs something, you can go in there and get it, right? But you were supposed to put something in, so it was common to everyone. Well, what happened is the very industrial workers had to provide for the lazy ones, right? And so the lazy one just thought, we'll just wait till they work and then we'll get everything from the common store. Well, then the workers that really wanted to work decided they're not going to work because they're providing with for a bunch of lazy guys. And so few contributed to the storehouse, so the supplies quickly were depleted. And this was America's first socialism, and it failed miserably. The socialism of the common store did not work in America. In fact, no one would want to work. Then Captain John Smith, you know him, don't you? Have you seen Pocahontas and John Smith? Well, anyway, of course we know John Smith did get captured by the England. Pocahontas did save his life, but she was more of a young teenager than a love of his life, that's for sure. But anyway, Captain John Smith, he lived 1580 to 1631. In 1608, he saved Jamestown from destruction because he took charge. He basically took charge of them all and says, anyone who does not work is not going to eat. You don't want to work? Then you're not going to eat. So, and then, then he was injured and he had to return to England. And Jamestown was on the brink of failure at this point. Remember, one half of them had died already, and now they're on the brink of failure. But luckily, John Smith was there to take over. In the winter of 1609 to 1610, many of these men were starving, and they were forced to eat dogs and horses and rats and mice. Oh, yuck, but they were starving. In 1610, only 60 colonists remained alive. Even after some people had come and joined them, only 60 of them remained alive. And many wanted to abandon Jamestown and just go home because they were having a hard time. But in the nick of time, several ships arrived in the spring with supplies and more settlers to come. So in 1619, the first boatload of women came to marry the settlers. So they were happy when they got wives, huh? Do you think? So that's kind of a history of Jamestown, huh? So Jamestown would have failed, definitely, but if the ships hadn't arrived with supplies and the women hadn't come. Beginning to prosper. Life then improved with the change in the economic system. No more common store. Everybody had to work. No communal living anymore. Each person would have his own parcel of land that they had to farm their own food. And private enterprise, which could be called capitalism, the individuals were free to make a living and to prosper on their own initiative. So they could make a living and prosper, and they wouldn't have to give to the common store to support everybody else, although some did, out of the goodness of their heart, help those that needed help, of course. Well, this was the cornerstone of Americans' greatness. It was private enterprise. Each family was responsible for their own parcel, for their own land. Then we have John Rolfe. Well, if you get a picture there of him and Pocahontas, because he married the Indian princess Pocahontas. Here's a picture of her getting baptized, actually. She had become a Christian. And so John Rolfe, the thing about him is he found a way to make a lot of money and become wealthy. How? He started growing tobacco. See, tobacco was used by the Native Americans, and he thought, surely in Europe, they're going to want some of this tobacco. So he started planting tobacco and shipping it to England. And of course, it sold like mad. And so he became very profitable selling tobacco, right? And of course, he brought his beautiful princess bride to England, where she ended up dying in England of some disease that she was not immune to, but she died pretty young. But she was the talk of all England, this beautiful Indian princess, Pocahontas, married to John Rolfe. Laborers and slaves. So then what happens? They were needing a larger labor force to work in the fields, more people to work. So the first indentured servants. They were servants. They were paid, their passage was paid to America by established colonists that needed people to come and work for them. And they would work without pay for 4 to 7 years, and then they'd be free. So a lot of indentured servants came that were English too, and Irish, especially a lot of Irish indentured servants. And many of these indentured servants became prosperous colonists. After 7 years, they were set free and they had established in America. But in 1619, slaves came. There was a Dutch ship that arrived from Africa with 20 African people to sell and sold the African slaves. And that would be starting the slave market in America. And this marked the beginning of slave trade in British North America. And later, millions of these Africans were sold as slaves. Slavery in America. Then Virginia became a royal colony. Virginia never prospered as a business venture anymore. It was Virginia colony was the London Company. The stockholders never regained investments in the London Company. The London Company did not get rich. I'll just say that. But the tobacco industry no longer obligated past 7 years. 7 years had passed, and so you could grow tobacco and make a lot of wealth in tobacco, right? And then in 1624, the king revoked the London Company charter. The London Company would be no more. It kind of went bankrupt. And then Virginia became a royal colony to the king, controlled by the King of England. But Virginia prospered at this point. Important precedents. What happened in Virginia? There was some important precedents. The House of Burgesses in 1619 is very important because that's how they would rule themselves. They had the House of Burgesses. The various districts, they sent representatives or delegates called burgesses. And they assembled in Jamestown and would be advisory to govern the colony. So how to govern the colony. So these would be their first representative government, would be the House of Burgesses in 1619, before the United States was a nation. In Jamestown, the House, just remember that. Then they had a rebellion called Bacon's Rebellion in 1675. Well, 1676, Native Americans started attacking a few of the frontier settlements that had just taken over their land, right? And so the Indians, Native Americans were attacking. The frontiersmen applied to the governor, who was William Berkeley at that time of, Jamestown, basically saying, we need help. You need to come out and protect us out here. And Governor Berkeley could care less about him. He failed to respond to even protect them or anything. And so Nathan Bacon, he was a wealthy young plantation owner. He was like in his 20s or 30s then. He lived 1647 to 1676, so very short life there. He was a young plantation owner, and he was afraid of the Indians, the Native Americans, attacking. So Bacon led a volunteer militia of frontiersmen from the frontier there, a militia. Those are his own little army. And then Berkeley rejected them and said, no, we're not going to help you. You can't do this. You can't lead your own armies. And so Bacon's men pursued the natives against the governor's wishes. They had to, actually, because the Indians were attacking, so they had to defend themselves. But they were accused of what was called Bacon's Rebellion, that you guys are rebelling against us. So then the frontiersmen got mad, and they marched on Jamestown, and they wanted to get rid of Berkeley, and they actually ended up burning Jamestown to the ground. So Berkeley had to flee there, and then Bacon died of illness at that time. And so this was called Bacon's Rebellion. But it set a precedent. because Bacon's rebellion indicated that Americans expected their government to protect all citizens, not just citizens in Jamestown or just citizens in certain areas, but that all Americans needed protection. So Bacon's rebellion, although it was a rebellion, was thought to be one of the precedents set is that they all needed protection. And so all of the Americans needed to get together despite their differences and be protected by, a militia. So that's it.